The morning sun rose over Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, casting its light over a harbor that, moments earlier, had been transformed into a tableau of chaos and fire. Explosions rocked the docks, battleships burned, and the air was thick with smoke, oil, and disbelief. For the United States, the attack was more than a military disaster. It was a stark awakening, a jolt that ended any lingering isolationist tendencies and thrust the nation fully into the global conflict of World War II. In the months and years that followed, the American military, industry, and society would be tested in ways that reshaped national identity, strategic thinking, and even the concept of power itself. This was the birth of what would later be called the American Century, a period in which the United States projected influence across oceans and continents through innovation, resilience, and unrelenting determination. From the outset, the challenges in the Pacific were unlike any battlefield previously encountered. Unlike Europe, where terrain and infrastructure were familiar and accessible, the Pacific presented a fragmented archipelago of islands, atolls, and reefs scattered across thousands of miles of open ocean. Logistics became a central concern, as the U.S. military had to supply, reinforce, and sustain forces over immense distances. Each island posed unique difficulties. Dense jungles, scorching heat, and treacherous coral formations threatened not only the success of operations but the health and survival of the soldiers themselves. Disease was as formidable an enemy as the Japanese forces. Malaria, dengue fever, and other tropical illnesses claimed thousands of troops and demanded new approaches to prevention and treatment. It quickly became evident that winning in the Pacific required more than conventional warfare. The U.S. Navy and Army Corps of Engineers, along with the newly formed Seabees naval construction battalions trained to build under fire, were thrust into a race against both nature and the enemy. Seabees were not only constructing airfields, ports, and roads, they were turning islands of jagged coral and dense vegetation into operational hubs capable of supporting aircraft, troops, and supplies. The islands offered no room for error. Coral had to be leveled, crushed, and compacted to create runways strong enough for heavy bombers, while engineers had to consider tides, drainage, and erosion in ways previously unimagined. The ingenuity of these units, their ability to improvise and innovate in hostile conditions, became a defining feature of the U.S. war effort. Every operation was a delicate balancing act between military strategy, engineering innovation, and disease prevention. Soldiers were trained not only in combat but also in survival, wearing long sleeves and insect repellent to prevent mosquito bites, taking atabrine tablets to ward off malaria, and maintaining strict hygiene despite the oppressive heat and scarcity of fresh water. Field hospitals evolved into both treatment centers and hubs of preventive research, recording infection rates, rotating sick or fatigued troops, and experimenting with nutrition and sanitation to maintain combat readiness. These practices reflected a broader understanding emerging within the U.S. military. Success in the Pacific depended as much on health, logistics, and environmental mastery as on bullets and bombs. The first major campaigns, from Guadalcanal to the Solomon Islands, were both brutal and instructive. U.S. troops faced not only entrenched Japanese defenders but also a jungle that seemed intent on claiming them. Every day brought a new challenge, navigating swamps, fending off mosquitoes, enduring torrential rain, and contending with limited rations. Yet in this adversity, the soldiers displayed remarkable resilience. Units developed routines to maintain discipline, from the systematic clearing of campsites to the careful monitoring of water supplies. Leaders who understood the importance of environmental intelligence gained trust and achieved higher operational efficiency. The message was clear: mastery over nature was inseparable from mastery over the enemy. Innovation extended beyond individual survival. The Seabees pioneered methods to construct airstrips on coral atolls, often under enemy fire and with minimal resources. Bulldozers, jackhammers, and even dynamite were deployed to flatten jagged surfaces, while crushed coral was compacted into durable runways capable of sustaining heavy aircraft. Supply chains were meticulously managed, ensuring the continuous delivery of not only ammunition but also medical supplies, food, and fuel. Each successful landing strip allowed aircraft to extend the reach of U.S. power, facilitating bombing raids, reconnaissance, and supply runs across islands previously considered inaccessible. In effect, the Pacific itself became a battlefield for engineering and logistics, where innovation determined the pace of victory. The psychological dimension of these campaigns cannot be overstated. Soldiers confronted constant fatigue, heat, and illness while facing an enemy trained for both combat and survival in the jungle. Yet the shared struggle fostered cohesion and morale. Units reminded each other to take medications, sleep under nets, and follow hygiene protocols, turning preventive health measures into acts of solidarity. Every night without an outbreak of malaria or dengue became a small victory, reinforcing discipline and collective responsibility. In these moments, the American approach to warfare, methodical, adaptive, and scientific, was forged in the fires of necessity. Beyond the battlefield, these experiences shaped the nation's self-image. Success in the Pacific, achieved through technological innovation, logistical mastery, and human endurance, signaled America's emerging global leadership. The ability to project power across thousands of miles of ocean, to sustain forces in hostile environments, and to integrate medical and engineering knowledge into military strategy became hallmarks of the American century. Soldiers' resilience and ingenuity were celebrated not only in military reports but also in popular media, reinforcing a narrative of national capability, adaptability, and determination. By the end of 1943, the lessons of the early Pacific campaigns were well established. Units capable of combining combat readiness with preventive health measures and environmental intelligence maintained operational effectiveness, while others suffered debilitating losses. Airfields, ports, and logistical networks established by Seabees enabled successive campaigns, from the Marianas to Iwo Jima, creating a template for rapid, adaptable military operations. The intertwining of strategy, engineering, and medicine exemplified a uniquely American approach to modern warfare, one that saw the battlefield, the environment, and the human body as interconnected components of operational success. In hindsight, the dawn of American engagement in the Pacific was more than a military struggle, it was a formative period in national identity. Soldiers endured disease, fatigue, and environmental extremes, while engineers turned hostile islands into platforms for victory. Innovation, discipline, and resilience became central to both military operations and the broader narrative of American global ascendancy. The Pacific campaigns tested every aspect of U.S. capability and, in doing so, laid the groundwork for a post-war era in which the United States would emerge as a leader in technology, medicine, logistics, and strategy. From the shock of Pearl Harbor to the first triumphant landings on fortified islands, Chapter 1 of America's Pacific story is one of awakening, adaptation, and determination. It is a story in which soldiers, engineers, and medical teams confronted the dual enemies of human adversaries and an unforgiving environment, transforming every challenge into a lesson that would define the American approach to global conflict. In the dense jungles, coral atolls, and mosquito-infested swamps of the Pacific, the United States discovered not only the stakes of total war but also the foundations of a century in which its influence, ingenuity, and resolve would shape the world. Engineering victory, Seabees and the Coral Challenge. The first glimpse of the island revealed a nightmare of jagged coral, uneven terrain, and sweltering heat. No amount of planning could fully prepare the men for what lay ahead. They had come to construct an airfield, a crucial stepping stone in the island-hopping campaign, but the very ground seemed to resist their efforts. Every step threatened twisted ankles, every clearing unearthed jagged limestone, and the relentless sun sapped strength before the workday had truly begun. These were not ordinary construction crews, they were the Seabees, America's naval construction battalions, trained to build under fire and adapt to the impossible. The Seabees' mission was deceptively simple in statement but monumental in execution: turn a hostile, uninhabitable coral island into a fully operational airfield within weeks. Time was a luxury they did not have. Japanese forces remained a constant threat, and without the airfield, U.S. operations in the region would stall. The men quickly realized that coral was both a resource and an adversary. Though hard and uneven, crushed coral could form a stable runway if prepared correctly. But first, the raw material had to be extracted, broken down, and compacted, a process that tested ingenuity, endurance, and teamwork. Traditional construction methods proved useless. Bulldozers became weapons against jagged rock, while jackhammers shattered stubborn coral formations. Dynamite was used with precision to break up the hardest outcrops, but even explosives required careful planning. Too much force risked creating unmanageable debris, too little left dangerous fragments. Once the coral was broken, it was crushed, leveled, and compacted into layers capable of supporting bombers and transport planes. Each layer required attention to drainage, compaction, and alignment. Any misstep could jeopardize aircraft operations and delay the broader campaign. Environmental factors compounded the challenge. High humidity caused equipment to rust, and tropical storms could wash away hours of labor in minutes. The Seabees had to engineer not only runways but also drainage systems, retaining walls, and leveled roads that could withstand torrential rains. At night, they slept in tents drenched with dew, often in mosquito-infested areas, constantly at risk of malaria and dengue fever. Soldiers rotated duties between construction and preventive health measures, clearing stagnant water, treating injuries, and maintaining strict hygiene protocols. Survival was as dependent on medical discipline as on construction skill. Despite these obstacles, innovation thrived. Teams developed makeshift rollers to compact coral more efficiently, improvised water trucks to reduce dust and maintain cohesion of the runway, and temporary steel matting to allow early aircraft landings even before the surface was fully stabilized. Coordination with military planners ensured that the runway's orientation maximized operational efficiency, taking into account wind direction, approach paths, and tactical vulnerabilities. Every design decision was informed by both engineering logic and battlefield necessity. The Seabees' efforts went beyond technical skill; they were a test of human endurance. Soldiers labored for long hours under blazing sun, lifting, drilling, and grading while maintaining alertness for potential enemy attacks. Many developed ingenious solutions to routine problems, using local materials to stabilize the ground, designing protective shelters for equipment, and creating assembly lines to expedite transport of coral rubble. This combination of improvisation and rigor became a hallmark of the Seabee approach, demonstrating that engineering could become a strategic weapon in itself. By the time the first airfield was operational, it had transformed the island's landscape entirely. What had been jagged coral, dense foliage, and swamps was now a network of runways, taxiways, and support facilities capable of sustaining continuous air operations. Fighter planes and bombers began landing within weeks of construction start, projecting American air power into previously unreachable areas. Each successful airfield provided a springboard for subsequent campaigns, enabling rapid deployment of troops, artillery, and supplies while reducing vulnerability to Japanese counterattacks. The islands themselves became symbols of American ingenuity and resilience, tangible evidence that disciplined labor, scientific knowledge, and creative problem-solving could overcome even the most inhospitable environments. Disease control remained intertwined with construction. Field hospitals monitored the health of laborers and soldiers, tracking infection rates and testing preventive measures. Compliance with anti-malarial regimens became a matter of survival. Every outbreak slowed construction and threatened operational timelines. Troops learned to view hygiene, netting, and medical routines not as inconveniences but as essential tools for mission success. In many ways, these health practices mirrored the engineering efforts, systematic, meticulous, and adaptive to conditions on the ground. The psychological impact of these campaigns was profound. Soldiers witnessed firsthand that human ingenuity could bend the environment to their needs. Each completed runway, each cleared coral reef, became a morale booster, proof that no obstacle was insurmountable when discipline, creativity, and teamwork were applied. The Seabees' work demonstrated a larger principle emerging in the Pacific. Victory was a combination of technological mastery, logistical coordination, and human endurance. Every island secured, every airfield operationalized, reflected not just military triumph but the capacity of the United States to innovate under pressure. This integration of construction, disease prevention, and operational strategy marked a turning point in the war. The Pacific Islands were no longer isolated outposts but functional hubs of American power. Airfields allowed reconnaissance planes to scout enemy positions, fighters to protect naval convoys, and bombers to strike at strategic targets deep within Japanese-held territory. Each newly operational airstrip multiplied the effectiveness of American forces, demonstrating that engineering success could directly influence the course of battles. The Seabees' work became a template for combining logistics, technology, and personnel management in challenging environments, a lesson that would extend far beyond the war. As the campaigns progressed, the broader implications of the Seabees' achievements became clear. The United States had developed a model for rapid, adaptive construction under extreme conditions, integrating environmental knowledge, preventive health measures, and operational planning. These innovations were later applied to rebuilding efforts, civil engineering projects, and even post-war tropical development programs. The lessons learned on coral atolls in the Pacific helped shape American approaches to problem-solving in both military and civilian contexts, reinforcing the emerging identity of the United States as a nation capable of global leadership through ingenuity, discipline, and coordinated effort. By the end of the island-hopping campaigns, it was evident that the Seabees' battles against coral had been as significant as any firefight. Their work demonstrated that infrastructure could be a decisive tool in warfare, and that careful integration of human, technological, and environmental factors could turn even the harshest terrain into a strategic asset. The islands, once considered insurmountable obstacles, had become stepping stones in a vast network of American power across the Pacific. The legacy of these campaigns would echo far beyond the war, shaping military doctrine, public health initiatives, and national identity in ways that define the mid-20th century. In the end, the story of the Seabees versus coral is not merely one of construction, it is a testament to innovation under pressure, human resilience, and the strategic application of knowledge in the face of extreme adversity. From jagged reefs and mosquito-infested swamps emerged runways that carried American fighters, bombers, and supplies across the Pacific, turning distant islands into beacons of operational efficiency. Each victory in the field reflected a broader truth: in the Pacific theater, as in history itself, adaptability, ingenuity, and disciplined execution could transform even the most hostile environment into a foundation for success, laying the groundwork for the American century. Wings over the Pacific, air power, health, and strategy. The roar of engines cut through the humid morning air as fighter planes lifted off from a freshly constructed coral runway, leaving behind clouds of dust and a trail of determination. Each takeoff symbolized more than a tactical maneuver, it represented the culmination of months of labor, ingenuity, and perseverance. These airfields, forged from jagged coral and sweat-soaked soil, were the lifelines of American strategy in the Pacific. Yet behind every flight lay unseen battles against mosquitoes, fever, and exhaustion, battles that often determined whether missions succeeded or failed. By late 1943, the United States had established a network of airstrips across key islands, extending the reach of Allied air power deep into Japanese-held territory. The success of this network relied on meticulous planning, innovative engineering, and strict preventive health protocols. Seabees had transformed hostile terrain into operational hubs, while military medical teams worked tirelessly to keep personnel combat ready. Diseases such as malaria and dengue fever, once overlooked in conventional warfare, became recognized as critical threats. Soldiers were not only fighting an enemy in the skies and jungles but also the invisible hazards of tropical pathogens. Airfield construction had revealed lessons that transcended engineering. The interplay between environment, labor, and technology became central to strategic planning. Runways needed to withstand the weight of bombers, drainage systems had to survive torrential rains, and temporary shelters had to protect personnel and equipment. At the same time, strict health measures ensured that troops remained effective. Nets, repellents, quinine, and field hygiene protocols were as essential to mission success as bulldozers and dynamite. Commanders quickly understood that an airstrip full of sick or exhausted men could achieve nothing, no matter how well built. As airfields became operational, the focus shifted to operational coordination. Reconnaissance planes scouted Japanese positions, while bombers and fighters struck supply lines, air bases, and fortifications. Each mission required seamless integration of logistics, intelligence, and environmental awareness. Pilots depended on accurate maps, engineers relied on terrain assessments, and medical teams had to anticipate tropical disease outbreaks. The war in the Pacific was as much a contest of planning and adaptability as it was of bullets and bombs. Every flight demonstrated the symbiotic relationship between human ingenuity and environmental mastery, showing that victory was forged as much in preparation as in combat. The psychological strain of these campaigns was relentless. Soldiers and airmen faced sweltering heat, constant humidity, and relentless insects. Sleep was scarce, and morale was tested daily by disease, fatigue, and the threat of enemy attack. Yet the shared hardships fostered camaraderie and resilience. Units developed routines for rest, nutrition, and medical monitoring, turning discipline into a form of survival. Preventive medicine became a matter of trust and teamwork. Failing to follow mosquito control protocols or to take quinine could endanger entire squads. In these moments, the military realized that leadership extended beyond tactics. It required safeguarding health, morale, and endurance. The operational impact of these efforts was immediate and profound. Airfields allowed the United States to strike Japanese positions with unprecedented speed and precision. Aircraft could reach targets previously considered unreachable, cutting supply lines, isolating garrisons, and supporting amphibious assaults. The success of the island-hopping campaign depended on this air superiority. Each airstrip, painstakingly carved from coral, became a strategic jewel, extending American reach while reducing the vulnerability of troops on the ground. Seabees work, medical diligence, and operational planning merged into a single, cohesive force multiplier. Innovation continued to define every aspect of the campaign. Engineers experimented with new techniques for compacting coral, protecting runways from erosion, and adapting materials for tropical conditions. Medical teams tested combinations of prophylactics, bed nets, and sanitation practices to reduce disease incidence. Logistic planners optimized supply chains, ensuring fuel, munitions, and medical supplies reached even the most remote islands. The Pacific Theater became a laboratory of modern warfare, where engineering, medicine, and strategy intersected to produce outcomes far beyond what conventional tactics alone could achieve. One of the most significant achievements of this period was the integration of human health into operational doctrine. Commanders recognized that disease could incapacitate more troops than enemy fire, leading to formal protocols for disease prevention, early detection, and treatment. Malaria control became a central concern. Water management, insecticide spraying, and regimented medication schedules were strictly enforced. Dengue fever, with its rapid onset and debilitating effects, was similarly monitored. These health measures were not peripheral, they were decisive. Campaigns that ignored disease suffered catastrophic attrition, while those that enforced strict preventive measures maintained effectiveness and morale. The coordination between engineering, air power, and medicine reflected a broader evolution in American military thought. The United States was learning to fight a war where conventional battlefield victories were intertwined with mastery of environment and human factors. Success depended on the seamless integration of technology, labor, health, and logistics. The Pacific campaigns became a proving ground for this holistic approach, demonstrating that the ability to adapt to extreme conditions and innovate rapidly could determine the fate of entire operations. As victories accumulated, the American identity began to crystallize around these experiences. Soldiers and engineers saw themselves as agents of ingenuity and resilience, capable of turning hostile environments into strategic assets. The narrative of the Seabees men who built under fire, transforming coral into runways, and of medical teams controlling invisible enemies, became emblematic of a national ethos. Determination, creativity, and the disciplined application of knowledge could overcome any obstacle. This was not merely a military lesson, it was a statement about the character of the United States as it emerged on the global stage. By mid-1944, the network of Pacific airfields enabled operations that directly shaped the outcome of the war. From the Mariana Islands to the Philippines, aircraft deployed from these islands dominated sea lanes, disrupted Japanese logistics, and provided close support for amphibious assaults. Every successful mission traced its origin to a combination of engineering foresight, preventive health measures, and disciplined operational planning. The lessons of airfield construction, environmental adaptation, and disease management were inseparable from strategic success. The war in the Pacific was a testament to the integration of human, technological, and environmental mastery, a model that would define future American military doctrine. The enduring legacy of this period extended beyond military outcomes. The integration of construction, medicine, and strategy informed post-war planning in both civilian and military contexts. Techniques developed for coral runway construction influenced civil engineering in tropical regions, while preventive medicine practices shaped public health policies in post-war territories. The Pacific campaigns had demonstrated that success in complex, unfamiliar environments required coordination across disciplines, a principle that would resonate long after the guns fell silent. Ultimately, the story of air power in the Pacific was inseparable from the human struggle against environment and disease. The roar of engines, the dust of coral, and the hum of mosquito-filled jungles formed a complex tableau where innovation, endurance, and discipline defined victory. Soldiers, engineers, and medical personnel each contributed to a collective effort that transformed isolated islands into strategic hubs, projecting American influence across thousands of miles of ocean. In doing so, they not only shaped the outcome of the war but also forged the principles of adaptability, ingenuity, and holistic planning that would underpin the American century. In this theater, the United States learned that true power was not measured solely in bombs or ships but in the ability to adapt, innovate, and sustain forces under the harshest conditions. Coral runways, mosquito nets, and careful medical oversight became as vital as artillery and aircraft. The integration of these elements into a coherent operational strategy exemplified a uniquely American approach to warfare, one that combined technology, labor, health, and planning into a force capable of projecting power across the globe. The lessons of these campaigns: ingenuity under pressure, disciplined adaptation, and the fusion of human and environmental mastery would echo far beyond the Pacific, shaping both military doctrine and national identity for decades to come. From coral runways to global power, the birth of the American century. The first rays of dawn over the Pacific revealed a mosaic of islands, once untouched by modern industry, now transformed into hubs of American military power. Runways stretched across coral atolls, buzzing with the activity of transport planes, bombers, and fighters. Supply ships docked alongside hastily constructed piers, while Seabees and medical teams moved in coordinated rhythm, ensuring that logistics, health, and operational readiness were maintained simultaneously. The war was far from over, yet the landscape bore witness to an extraordinary transformation, one that would shape both the immediate outcome of World War II and the global identity of the United States. The culmination of the Pacific campaigns depended on the integration of lessons learned across years of grueling labor, combat, and innovation. Early challenges: jagged coral, torrential rains, disease outbreaks, and relentless enemy resistance had forced a convergence of engineering ingenuity, medical strategy, and tactical planning. By 1945, this integration had matured into a model of operational excellence. Airfields that had been unthinkable a few months earlier now supported sustained bombing raids, troop movements, and reconnaissance missions, extending American reach deeper into the Pacific than anyone had imagined. Every flight, every landing, and every supply drop was a testament to the foresight and adaptability of the men who had labored under extreme conditions. Central to this achievement was the recognition that human health and operational capability were inseparable. Malaria and dengue fever, once dismissed as inconvenient tropical maladies, had been systematically addressed through meticulous preventive strategies. Quinine distribution, mosquito netting, insecticide spraying, and strict sanitation protocols had become standard operating procedures. Commanders learned that a single outbreak could immobilize entire units, compromise construction projects, and jeopardize missions. The synchronization of disease control with airfield construction and troop deployment demonstrated a new understanding of warfare, that victory required mastery not only over enemy forces but also over the environment itself. Seabees had become more than engineers, they were architects of strategic mobility. Every runway, taxiway, and support facility represented months of calculated effort to convert hostile terrain into operational advantage. Coral, once an obstacle, was transformed into a foundation capable of sustaining the heaviest bombers. Innovative construction techniques, layered compaction, improvised drainage systems, and temporary matting for early aircraft landings enabled operations to commence faster than traditional methods would have allowed. The rapid construction of multiple airfields across scattered islands multiplied the effectiveness of Allied forces, providing a logistical and tactical advantage that Japanese forces could not match. As the Allies advanced toward Japan, the network of Pacific airfields allowed for unprecedented operational flexibility. Bombers could strike with accuracy, fighters provided air cover for naval convoys, and reconnaissance planes mapped enemy positions in real time. The combination of mobility, intelligence, and sustained supply lines ensured that American forces could operate across vast distances, a capability that became decisive in the final months of the war. The successful projection of power across such a dispersed theater reinforced a growing national narrative. The United States was emerging not merely as a regional power but as a global force capable of decisive action anywhere in the world. Beyond military success, the campaigns highlighted the critical role of coordination across disciplines. Engineers, medical personnel, logisticians, and combat units worked in unison, each element reinforcing the other. Disease prevention allowed construction crews to maintain output, which enabled air operations to continue uninterrupted. Air superiority protected engineers and supply lines, while efficient logistics ensured that troops had food, medicine, and fuel. This interdependence illustrated a modern principle of warfare: no single factor, however important, could secure victory alone. Success depended on systems thinking, adaptability, and the disciplined application of knowledge across multiple domains. The human dimension of these achievements cannot be overstated. Soldiers and engineers endured intense heat, exhausting labor, and constant threats from disease and enemy action. The psychological resilience required to maintain focus and morale under such conditions was extraordinary. Shared hardships fostered trust, ingenuity, and a sense of collective purpose. Troops learned that innovation, discipline, and care for one another were as crucial as strategic plans and technological superiority. These experiences forged an ethos that would carry into post-war American culture, that resourcefulness, courage, and collaboration could overcome seemingly insurmountable challenges. As victory in the Pacific drew closer, the broader implications became clear. The successful integration of engineering, medicine, and military strategy was more than a tactical advantage, it signaled the emergence of a new form of national power. The United States had demonstrated that it could mobilize resources, technology, and human capital to achieve objectives that were previously unimaginable. Coral runways, mosquito nets, and meticulously organized supply chains became symbols of a capability that extended far beyond the battlefield. The Pacific campaigns had forged a blueprint for global influence, emphasizing innovation, discipline, and strategic foresight. This period also marked the birth of the American century, a concept rooted in the projection of power, technological leadership, and the ability to shape events worldwide. The lessons of the Pacific Theater resonated in post-war planning, diplomacy, and development strategies. Infrastructure projects, public health initiatives, and engineering programs drew directly from wartime experience, demonstrating that the principles tested under fire could guide peacetime progress. The transformation of coral islands into airfields became a metaphor for the larger capacity of the United States, to take raw potential, confront obstacles, and generate outcomes that redefined possibilities. The Seabees' contributions, often overlooked in traditional narratives, were emblematic of this emerging identity. Their work demonstrated that intelligence, creativity, and disciplined execution could multiply national power. Medical teams' efforts to prevent disease illustrated that human capital was as critical as hardware. Together, these elements reinforced a vision of American capability, a nation able to integrate knowledge, labor, and strategy to achieve both immediate and long-term goals. The legacy of these campaigns extended beyond victory over Japan. It established a model for global engagement that emphasized adaptability, innovation, and responsibility. By the time Japan surrendered, the United States had transformed not only the Pacific Islands but also the global balance of power. Airfields that had once been impossible dreams now supported the rapid deployment of forces and sustained logistical operations. Disease prevention had safeguarded thousands of lives, ensuring operational continuity. Engineering ingenuity had turned hostile terrain into strategic assets. Collectively, these achievements demonstrated that American influence would no longer be confined by geography or circumstance. The Pacific theater had become both a proving ground and a showcase for the capabilities that would define the mid-20th century. In retrospect, the story of the Seabees, medical teams, and air operations across the Pacific encapsulates the essence of the American century. It is a narrative of innovation under pressure, coordinated action in complex environments, and the disciplined harnessing of human and technological resources to achieve extraordinary outcomes. Coral runways became more than infrastructure, they were symbols of resilience, foresight, and the transformative power of collective effort. Disease control became more than medicine, it was a strategic instrument of national power. Together, these achievements laid the foundation for a United States that would not only win a global war but also define its role in shaping the post-war world. The Pacific campaigns demonstrated that real power is multidimensional. It relies on engineering, logistics, medicine, human endurance, and strategic vision. It requires the capacity to adapt to unforeseen challenges and to integrate diverse fields of knowledge toward a unified objective. The islands of the Pacific, once remote and forbidding, were transformed into launching points for a global presence, reflecting an emerging American identity characterized by ingenuity, adaptability, and determination. The victories there were not simply military, they were cultural and strategic, signaling the arrival of a nation ready to lead on the world stage. The legacy of these campaigns, and the birth of the American century, rests on the principle that every challenge, be it coral reefs, tropical disease, or logistical complexity, can be transformed into opportunity through vision, discipline, and collaboration. The Seabees' runways, the airmen's missions, and the doctors' vigilance together created a tapestry of achievement that propelled the United States into a new era of influence and responsibility. The Pacific was no longer a distant battlefield, it had become the proving ground for an identity that would shape history, demonstrating that American ingenuity and resilience could reshape the world itself.